It was supposed to be just another quiet day for 85-year-old veteran John Collins, but what happened next would change his life forever. Walking through his neighborhood, John had no idea that his peaceful afternoon would soon turn into a nightmare. As two local police officers approached him, what followed was something no one could have expected: an elderly man, a decorated war hero, getting bullied and belittled by those who swore to protect him. At first, John tried to stay calm, but the situation quickly escalated. The officers, making accusations without any real reason, treated him like a criminal. John, whose service to his country had earned him respect and honor, found himself in a fight for his dignity. But just when it seemed like there was no way out, John made a call that would leave everyone stunned. Who did John call, and how could a simple phone call possibly turn the tables on the entire situation? As the tension rose and the officers seemed determined to push him further, this shocking phone call would reveal a side of John that no one saw coming. Stay tuned to find out how one man's bravery and history would soon leave everyone questioning everything. What happens next will leave you on the edge of your seat. John Collins had lived through a lifetime of struggles: World War II, the loss of close friends, and the challenges of being a soldier in a world that often forgot the price of peace. He was a quiet man, always humble, always willing to lend a hand. His neighbors respected him, but over the years, the bonds he'd formed with others had weakened. Most didn't realize the deep sense of pride and pain that came with being a veteran. They saw an old man who had aged and slowed, someone easy to overlook. But John wasn't someone you should forget. On that fateful afternoon, John had been on his way to the post office, as he did every Thursday, when he crossed paths with the two officers. They had no real reason to stop him, no reason to question his actions. But there was something in the way they looked at him, a judgment in their eyes, a certain arrogance that came with the badge they wore. They demanded answers when John, as always, had done nothing wrong. For a moment, John considered just walking away, but he knew the consequences. He had fought for his country, but what about the everyday battles? The battles where the people meant to protect him were now the ones causing him harm. He didn't just want to back down. Not this time. That's when he reached for his phone. The number on the screen was one he hadn't dialed in years, but somehow he knew this was the moment it had to be made. John's fingers trembled slightly as he held the phone to his ear. The familiar tone of the dial-up was like a whisper from the past, bringing him back to days long gone. His thoughts rushed, and for a second, he questioned his decision. Was it the right time to reach out? But then he glanced at the two officers, their impatient glares fixed on him, their arrogance obvious. He couldn't back down. Not this time. The phone rang twice, and then a familiar voice answered. It was a voice from his past, one that sent chills down his spine. "John," the voice asked, calm but heavy with years of history. It was Lieutenant Sarah Hawkins, his former commander, and someone who had once been his closest ally. They hadn't spoken in years, not since she had left the service, taking on a role in law enforcement, far away from the war zone where they had once fought side by side. "Sarah, it's me. I need help," John said, his voice shaky. "I'm in a situation here, and I can't do this alone." She didn't hesitate. "Where are you?" The officers, meanwhile, were growing more impatient. One of them, Officer Daniels, stepped forward, towering over John with an expression that spoke volumes. "You gonna make a call, old man," he sneered. "You think someone's coming to save you." John didn't flinch. He could feel his heart racing, but he stood firm. "I don't need saving," he muttered, more to himself than anyone else. He wasn't the man he used to be, but he wasn't going to let them treat him like this. He couldn't. Sarah's voice cut through the tension, pulling John back into focus. "I'm on my way," she said, with a hint of urgency. "Hold on, John. Just hang in there." But as the minutes dragged on, John's thoughts turned dark. What had gone wrong? Why was it that the very people who were supposed to serve and protect had turned against him? Officer Daniels kept pressing, each word more demeaning than the last, but John's mind was set. Sarah was coming, But would she be able to handle the officer's growing hostility? In that moment, everything seemed to hang in the balance. Would Sarah arrive in time? And if she did, what would happen next? As the tension in the air thickened, John couldn't shake the feeling that something even bigger was at play, something that went beyond just a run-in with two rogue officers. But what? The minutes seemed to drag on forever as John stood there, his back straight, refusing to let them see how much their words were getting to him. Officer Daniels stepped closer, his face inches from John's, sneering down at the frail, weathered man before him. "What's it gonna be, old man? You going to keep wasting our time, or do we need to teach you some respect?" John didn't budge. He knew what Daniels wanted, a response, something to provoke him. But John's mind was elsewhere. Sarah was on her way, and that thought kept him grounded. Officer Daniels glanced at his partner, Officer Green, who stood a few feet away, arms crossed, watching the scene unfold with a smirk. The two shared a look, a silent agreement passing between them. John's gut twisted. They were enjoying this. And he realized it wasn't just about him being an old man. It was about power and abuse of it. They weren't just going to let him walk away. They wanted him to beg, to break down, and John wasn't going to give them the satisfaction. As the officers taunted him, John's mind raced. What would Sarah do when she arrived? She was coming, but would she be enough to stop them? He knew her well enough to know she wouldn't back down, but these men weren't just any officers. There was something off about them, something John couldn't quite put his finger on. He had seen that kind of attitude in the trenches, soldiers who got drunk on power and thought they were untouchable. But these weren't soldiers, they were supposed to be the good guys. John's grip on the phone tightened, his knuckles white. He didn't know how much longer he could hold out. The threat of violence loomed in the air. He had been through worse, much worse, but this felt different. The officers' verbal jabs were like daggers, each one hitting deeper than the last. "Come on, old man. Give us a reason," Officer Daniels taunted, stepping even closer. The crowd that had gathered was growing, but no one seemed to be stepping in. John realized with a sinking feeling that maybe no one was coming to his rescue, not unless Sarah showed up in time. The sound of sirens could be heard faintly in the distance. It was hard to tell if they were approaching, or if it was just a coincidence. John's heart skipped a beat. Was that Sarah? Or were they just getting closer to their breaking point? Officer Daniels saw John's sudden shift in expression and grinned. "You think help is on the way? You're wasting your time, old man. There's nothing that can save you now." Just as Daniels reached out, a voice echoed from behind. "That's where you're wrong." John's heart leaped in his chest as he turned. There, in the distance, Sarah's car came into view, lights flashing. It was too late to turn back now. But what would happen when she arrived? Would she bring justice, or was she just another player in a much larger game? The air was thick with anticipation, and for the first time, John wasn't sure how this story would end. The car screeched to a halt, its tires skidding on the pavement as Sarah Hawkins stepped out, her sharp gaze scanning the scene. For a moment, everything felt frozen. John, standing tall, the officers brimming with their smug confidence, the crowd of onlookers too afraid to intervene. But just as quickly, the tension snapped. Sarah didn't waste a second. She moved quickly toward the officers, her voice calm but unwavering. "What's going on here?" she asked, locking eyes with Daniels, then Green. But before they could respond, a voice shouted from behind her. "Lieutenant Hawkins, step away from the officers now." Sarah froze, her hand halfway to her gun. The words hung in the air, and for a split second, John thought he must have misheard. But when he turned around, his heart sank. Another officer, one John hadn't seen before, emerged from an unmarked car, his uniform different, his posture rigid, like a predator circling its prey. This wasn't just any officer. John recognized the look in his eyes. This was someone who knew how to play the game. Someone who had no interest in justice, only control. And as the new officer approached, Sarah's confident stance faltered ever so slightly. Captain Miller, she said, her voice tight with surprise, but there was a shift in her tone, something dark, something John hadn't expected to hear. What are you doing here? Miller's gaze flickered over to John, then back to Sarah. His smile was cold, calculated. I'm here to make sure things stay in line, Lieutenant. We wouldn't want any misunderstandings, would we? John's stomach churned. This wasn't just about two rogue officers bullying an elderly man. This was about something much larger. There was a network of power at play, and Miller, with his icy demeanor, was its centerpiece. Sarah hesitated. She had known Miller in the past, and in a way, she had trusted him. But there was something in his eyes now that made her doubt everything. The friendly camaraderie that once existed between them had long since faded, replaced by a dangerous sense of authority. As the officers closed in on them, John felt his pulse quicken. There was no turning back now. This wasn't just a confrontation, it was a standoff. But who could he trust? Sarah, Miller? Was Sarah already too deep into this system, or had she really come to save him? The crowd that had gathered shifted uneasily, some whispering, others watching in silence. But John could feel it. This was more than just a fight for his dignity. This was the beginning of something far more dangerous, and he was caught right in the middle of it. As the sirens grew louder, signaling even more officers arriving, John knew he had one chance left. But the real question was, who was playing whose game? And what would happen when the truth finally came to light? The tension in the air was suffocating, every breath feeling like it could be the last before everything exploded. Sarah and Captain Miller stood facing each other, the weight of their past hanging between them like an unseen thread. John felt the air shift, the storm brewing, but he didn't know who would strike first. Sarah's hand was still on her gun, but it wasn't drawn yet. Miller's smile deepened, his eyes cold. Sarah, you really think you can stop me? You always did think you were above the rules. John could see the doubt in Sarah's eyes, but there was something else there too, a flicker of recognition, like she knew this moment was coming. Her grip tightened on the holster, but before she could speak, Miller raised his hand, signaling to the officers behind him. The scene had gone from tense to volatile in a matter of seconds. Officer Daniels and Officer Green stepped closer, ready to back Miller, their eyes gleaming with something dangerous. But Sarah didn't move. She stood firm, like a rock in the middle of an ocean about to be swallowed by waves. What do you want, Miller? Sarah finally asked, her voice low but resolute. Miller took a step closer to Sarah, his tone almost mocking. I want control, Lieutenant. I've had enough of people like you getting in the way of progress. This man, he gestured toward John, is just a symbol. A reminder of a time when things were harder, when people like you fought for the wrong side. He paused, letting the words sink in. You think you can protect him? Think again. John's mind raced. He wasn't sure who Miller was, or why he was saying these things. But one thing was clear. This wasn't just about a man in his 80s being bullied by cops. This was about power, corruption, and a system that had long since abandoned its own principles. The officers weren't here to serve or protect. They were part of the problem. As the officers moved in closer, John's mind flashed back to his years in the service. The discipline, the strategy, the way a well-placed word or action could change the tide of a battle. Without thinking, he reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small, faded letter. It was a letter he hadn't looked at in years, one that had been buried in the back of his mind until now. He unfolded it slowly, each creased corner a reminder of a time long past. The letter was from a man he had trusted during the war, his former commanding officer, who had written it shortly before his death. It wasn't just a letter. It was a document with the names of corrupt officials, shady deals, and a hidden network of power. As he held it up, his voice broke through the tension like a knife. You're not in control, Miller. This was never about me. This is about everything you've been hiding. And I'm not the only one who knows. Miller's confident smirk faltered, his eyes narrowing. You think a letter will stop me? Sarah's eyes flicked to John, then to Miller, and she took a deep breath. No, but this might, she said, drawing her gun in one swift motion. In an instant, the standoff turned into chaos. Officers scrambled, but Sarah's voice rang out, commanding, decisive. "We've got enough on you, Miller. You're done." Miller's expression twisted in disbelief. "You think they'll believe you? This system's bigger than you, bigger than anyone." But as Sarah raised the letter John had just shown her, the evidence of corruption and cover-ups that spanned years, Miller's confidence cracked. The sirens outside grew louder, signaling reinforcements arriving, but not for Miller, not this time.